whatever time it is. Actually, it's 7 o'clock where I am because I'm based in Scotland, but I guess it's a different time for nearly everybody in the screen. And I'd like to welcome everyone to the field ecology panel discussion. And just like with everything else in our lives, teaching field ecology has become an incredibly challenging thing, as has doing field ecology, had a significant effect on my life. My name is Tom Marr. I'm a professor of plant biology at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. You may have picked up the Scottish accent. I'm actually American, and I'll be introducing our panelists today in turn. And as each panelist starts, they can just say briefly who they are, and then give roughly a 5-minute pitch, and then we'll be going over to questions. And I'm going to organize panels according to the way they appear on my screen, which may not be the way they appear on your screen. So I'm going to start with David Bowne. David, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, and I want to congratulate you on pronouncing my name correctly. That is so rare, so thank you. So it is David Bowne. Hi, everyone. I'm a ecologist at Elizabethtown College, which is a primarily undergraduate institution in Pennsylvania in the United States. And in my breakout group, I'm going to be talking about my experience with kind of combining field ecology and then using field ecology as a way of making ecology maybe a little bit more intriguing, a little more interesting to both majors, right? Especially those majors who don't inherently have an interest in ecology, but also to non-major students. But doing that in a way that they can take what they're learning in the field and basically train themselves and start looking for ecological stories. I'm really interested in, and I do this myself and I teach courses on this, integrating ecological science with creative writing. And so as they're learning about the world around them, have them key in on particular things that interest them that they're learning through field ecology, and then take that and create their own stories, fictional stories based on what they're learning. I found it's a great way to really engage the students' interest, and it can also be a really interesting way for the faculty to learn what actually interests the students, because the students are seeing things that we don't see. Sometimes our personal biases are kind of exposed by what the students are writing, and I'm like, I didn't even realize I talked about that. And yet the students are picking up on all these little subtle cues. So I'll be talking about some success I've had with that, both for major students and non-majors at the undergraduate level. So thank you. Tom, you're muted.
I was doing the courteous thing and muting between talking bouts, and now I'm unmuted. Going around the screen, the next person in my field of vision is Rachel Krause.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's good to be in all of your company virtually here. I am an assistant professor of biology at Canadian Mennonite University, which is in Winnipeg in Canada. We're a small undergraduate teaching institution, liberal arts university. And we have a fairly new biology program, but it is getting a lot of excitement from our students in the community. So I'm going to talk about a particular semester-long journal project that I do with one of my first-year classes. It's a first-year evolution and ecology course that it serves dual purposes. It's both required first-year course for biology majors and environmental studies majors, and it also fulfills the natural science requirement of our core curriculum for other majors. And so I get about half first-year major students and half more senior non-major students all together in this course. So I've used this journal project as a way to kind of anchor the course and give everyone in the class the opportunity to work at their own level and explore their interests. So I'll talk a bit about the project that I use. And I'll talk about how the journal project helps to overcome the challenges of having a very diverse group of students in one class. And also how it fits with the larger program design of our biology and environmental studies majors. We're in Winnipeg. We're right by the Assiniboine Forest, which is almost 300 hectares of aspen parkland within the city limits. So we're in a really special location. So I use the forest for labs and projects throughout the curriculum. And so this project in the first year is a chance to get major students introduced to the forest and get them set up to do more kind of work, more ecology work in the forest a little bit later on. So in my talk, I'll also mention some other assignments and activities that I've scaffolded around the journal to make it more effective for students. And then I'll also talk about shifts that I made this year. So we're in kind of a hybrid teaching situation this year. We have students online and we have students who attend in person, and we're trying to juggle them all at the same time. And some students are in the city and other students aren't in the city. Our international students haven't been able to get here yet, if they weren't here before the pandemic. And so I've had to shift a few things, change where students are doing it. I've changed the introductory assignment and activity that we do, but I've kept the core of it, which is having students physically go out into the field and record their observations, record them physically in a book, even though we're supposed to be paperless now, because I think that's really central to what we're trying to do with students, and thinking about Brian Dewsbury's keynote this morning, and how do we introduce students to the field of biology, even students who come into the class and they say, well, I'm not a science person. I'm here because I have to be here. And how can we use field experiences, field learning to really draw all of those students in? So I have a few excerpts too that I'll share with you that aren't from this year, but could have been. They illustrate some of the things that I love about this assignment. So that's what I'll be talking about.
Good. Okay, well, thank you very much, Rachel. By the way, I thought it would be appropriate, since we're talking about field ecology, to go to Brazil. So that's where I am right at the moment, instead of having my junkie office in the background. Speaking of junkie offices in the background, the next person up is Phil Gibson, who has a very intriguing background. And I think that's a real background, isn't it, Phil? Or is it, anyway, go ahead. You're on.
Yes, it is. So, hello, everybody. I'm Phil Gibson. I am a professor of biology and a professor of plant biology at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma. And so I am coming to you from my research lab, which is now my teaching space for teaching my 200 plus intro students. So rather than having beakers and bottles behind me, I pulled all of the skulls out of our intro lab that we use for one of our activities and decided that I'd put that behind me. And given that Halloween's coming up very soon, or Samhain if you are in Scotland and Ireland, it seems that having skulls and things is appropriate for this time of year. But anyway, what I'm going to be talking about is how I have also adapted to the changes of going completely online for our lectures. And then for this semester, we do have face-to-face labs, but just for safety and everything, since there were so many unknowns, and we've had a lot of students that haven't been able to attend in person, the labs have sort of a combination of online and face-to-face students there. But next semester, we're hoping to be able to do some more traditional types of labs where students are not just doing simulations. So what I'm going to be talking about in my session is a lab that we're going to try and use next semester, which will be the ultimate in social distancing, because students can go out to one of the local parks nearby on campus and collect some field data. And the type of data I'm going to be talking about is forestry data. I, for several years, have taught a field ecology course. I've taught it in the southern coastal plain of Georgia, the Appalachians, Colorado, and even there are forests in Oklahoma where I've taught this, but there are a lot of forestry techniques that I've learned in my background that I'll be talking about as things that you can send students out to do that are extremely cheap. They generate lots of data, so these are data-rich activities. And then I'm also going to talk about some other activities, that, some things from HHMI Biointeractive and other resources to really show students what field biology is all about. One of the things I've noticed in many years of teaching is students often come in with a very limited idea of what they can do with biology. It's always pre-med or some type of allied health kind of thing. And they have no idea what field biology is about. And I'm a field biologist. This is the first year in ages I haven't been able to get out and do what I normally do. But I just want to show my students that first of all, there are these other career possibilities, but even to show the students that are going into health professions that a lot of the things they think about are based on fundamental principles of ecology. So for example, microbiomes, people talk about that a lot and understanding that kind of thing. Well, that's just good community diversity and ecology. And my dental students, we talk a lot about how they are really managing oral ecosystems in their work. And so a lot of these things that we think about as field biology, we can teach them, but then find these other applications in other fields. And so that's kind of the connections I try to make. So anyway, that's what I'll be talking about, is this way of linking sort of online classes, face-to-face classes, and lab experience or field experiences into whatever the lab might be.
Good. You're gonna watch this muting business. Okay, next up is DeeDee Wright. So DeeDee, you're on.
All right. Well, hello, I'm DeeDee Wright, and I am a PhD candidate.
Actually, just could you try speaking up a little bit?
Sure. Is that better? Is that coming through louder? Okay.
I think so.
All right. I am at Colorado State University. I'm currently a PhD candidate in the Ecology program with a specialization in human-environment interactions. But prior to my work on this PhD, I was a middle and high school science and health teacher for 18 years, and then worked at the district level developing curriculum for 6 years. So now I've been able to combine my practitioner, okay, let me see if why my volume's hard to hear.
Actually, I just turned my volume up. You're fine. It was me, not you.
Okay. So I've been
Actually, you are getting some notes in the chat that other people are having a hard time. So yeah, if you could try to up your own volume.
Yeah, I did up my own volume. Is that any better when I'm talking? Or is it still difficult?
We had a suggestion to try sharing your computer sound. I think maybe if Tom, maybe we can get you to mute, and I think it'll be all right that way. Yep.
Okay, it seems like some people are okay and for some it's not, and I don't know what the difference is. I'm sorry. So I will just try to talk louder myself, right? Because talking louder always makes it more clear, right? Okay, so at Colorado State University, along with my research on place-based education, I work with groups through the Robert Noyce Scholarship Program from the National Science Foundation with pre-service teachers who themselves are going to become science and math teachers in K-12 systems. And so the session I'm going to lead is about instilling a sense of place and how we can do that with our students without actually having to take them outside. So the group of students that I'm working with are going out on their own field experiences in classrooms, but then they're having to figure out how do they take their own K-12 students and provide field experiences for them and instill a sense of place in them as well. So we've put together a workshop model that will work well within the classroom, so that you can say, how can you help get people connected to the places that they're from?
Okay, is that it, DeeDee? You're all set?
That's it. I hope.
Well, that's fine. I could no longer tell about the volume because I just turned my speakers up to a really high level, but I think that was probably okay. And I wasn't sure about the interference from my microphone, and I'm sorry if that was contributing to the problem. So we are still waiting for open questions. And until we start getting questions from the rest of the world, and the rest of the world is here right at the moment, I'm going to sort of put forward a question or two just to keep the conversation going. And one of the things that has struck me, is true at St. Andrews, is true for every single person on this panel, and actually many, many of us in the profession, is that we've been ad hocing a lot of things since last March. And ad hocing, how are we going to provide a reasonable exposure to things when we can't meet people in person? How are we going to provide access to the field experience without going into the field? And at some point that may change. Oh, good, we have a question, but I'll finish this thought. Is you know, at some point we're not ad hocing anymore. It's kind of the way things are, and I'm sort of myself hoping that we come out of the other end of this doing things, having discovered better ways of doing some things, and that actually there's some real change, and it's not just, oh good, thank God it's finally over, we can go back to everything we used to do. I'm hoping we can do it better. I guess that's more of a comment than a question, because we have a real question now from Jessica Pratt. So what kind of field experience during COVID? Are we establishing best practice, or do we really have data to say what is working? Not unrelated to what I was just talking about, but are we establishing best practice? Do we have any way of knowing whether it is best practice, whether we're doing things well or not? Or is there data to support it? Anyone want to come in on that? I see knitted brow.
I guess, yeah, I'll jump in there. So I definitely can't say this is best practice, right? And I don't think anyone is collecting data in a meaningful way to test whether what we're all individually doing are best practices. I know for me, establishing field experiences during COVID, I basically took the approach of let's see a little bit of the silver lining in this, where now that students are kind of dispersed wherever they are, we can increase the range of places that they're going out and sampling, right? So when they were with me on campus, I would just take them to my local forest and they would only learn about that, right? Or, you know, whatever ecosystem we're visiting. Now I'll just say to them, okay, you're going to go out, I'm going to teach you a quadrat vegetation sampling method. And do you have a hula hoop? We'll use a hula hoop, right? I'm not asking you to make a meter square, but let's just take what you have or can easily acquire and collect data where you are. And it gets a little bit to that point of what DeeDee was saying, right? About that sense of place, giving students more of the ability to really investigate places that are meaningful to them, even if that's their front yard. That's what we have to work with, and that is a very meaningful place to them and full of rich ecological lessons. So I don't know if that's best practice or not, but I think it's a pretty solid approach.
And I can jump in there. I agree with that, because it is very interesting trying to have these pre-service teachers have field experiences in schools, and where they're going to visit schools is they're visiting them online. right? So they're very worried about, how will I get a job because I don't have any practice in a real classroom? And so in some sense, it's trying to help them see that an online classroom is a real classroom, right? It just looks differently than it does if you're in a face-to-face classroom. And they have those same questions also about how, if I'm trying to teach science and get students outside to go learn about the environment around them, how can I do that if we're all stuck inside? So I think like what David said is getting students to see that right there in their own front yard, backyard, local park, those are all places that they can learn about and learn about the ecology of them.
Yeah, I love that, DeeDee. I think this is a really great opportunity right now for us to help students see that nature is actually all around them. And I mean, we're in kind of a situation where I can take students to the field, and we are doing some field exercises because of the situation we're in Winnipeg. But for all students to recognize that they can see some of these processes right around them is really valuable, and actually maybe where we should start every year and not just this year, because this is what we can do.
Phil, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was thinking about the answers there, and I guess one thing I keep coming back to is everybody is talking about field experiences, but one thing to remember is, what's the purpose of having the students do the field experience in general? And for me, what I often want is just to get them outside and looking at the world happening. Even though we went online in the spring last year, I was still able to interact with my class and say, okay, be paying attention to these things that are happening outside, because even though I had students when they left, they scattered to all corners of the globe, all sorts of places, we could still talk about, okay, what's happening outside of your window in Korea or Alaska or Texas or Oklahoma. And so even just getting students to interact with nature in any kind of way, just observing, I think is really important. But also, I like sort of hearing about just getting people out to sample and still engaging students in data processes. So that's another part of why I like students doing field work, is it generates lots and lots of data. There are all kinds of things that you can analyze and work with. And so even with students not being in the classrooms and labs like it used to be in the before times, sort of how now we can still think about, okay, we can still get them collecting data, we can still get them outside doing something that gets at good core scientific skills.
Actually, I'm just going to throw one in, even though I'm not an actual panelist. I think that the technology and mechanisms for communicating with students and collating information that were there before and have always been there, we're sort of in a way in a realm of specialist knowledge. But even something like Microsoft Teams or various Google documents and things, that some of them were always there, but now we actually have had to learn how to use them. And there are some actual advantages to using some of these things for communicating with students and coordinating field efforts and things like that. Jessica Pratt came back with a comment. I appreciate this parallel to classroom teaching experiences and field work. I'm also involved in our STEM teacher prep and hadn't recognized this parallel before. And I think it actually, again, there's an element of clarity that comes in with having to rethink these things, because you see connections that you may not have really quite thought through. So that's great. We have another question from Sarah Bois. Do any of you have advice, suggestions for an ecologist? This would be Sarah. She says me, but I have to say her because it's not me. Who works at a conservation organization, Land Trust. How can we as an organization support your efforts in academia to bring and continue field experiences? So over to the panel. And I'm going to start with Phil.
Yeah, so before I came to the University of Oklahoma, I was at a liberal arts college in Atlanta, Georgia, and I worked a lot with conservation groups and different citizen science kinds of things. And there, it's really about communicating with educators in your area and letting them know what's possible. So because I knew about different sort of land trusts and conservation groups in the Atlanta area, whenever they had opportunities to see places or maybe had a new property they were acquiring, that they would let us know so that we could take students to that location, and in some instances even do some preliminary data collection and analysis of, okay, here's what the plants are that are in this place, and that kind of background work. So the main thing is just to communicate with folks and let them know what you have available and what you can do.
Yeah, I'll second that. Here in Pennsylvania, I was involved with a local land trust, and it's been a very mutually beneficial experience. I always, we're ecologists. I always think in terms of mutualisms, right? How can we help each other out and advance our personal goals by helping the other organization? The land trust that I've worked with, our students participated in bio blitzes, right? To help them assess what's there, invasive species inventories, water sampling, all these things which provide information to the land trust and help them manage their land. But then our students are getting these great experiences, hands, feet, everything dirty out there. And I always remember one student who I went, took to a weekend invasive species removal at this site. And this was a student who was kind of just drifting through, didn't know what he wanted. And an afternoon of removing multiflora rose, right? Just got him so excited. And he's like, this is what I want to do, right? And other students will be like, this was the worst experience ever. But for him, that was awesome. And so the land trust, got volunteers to help, and then he got direction, which was just wonderful for me to see. So I think there's a tremendous possibilities there at many levels. Really, you need to think about what you want to get out of it, right? And just talk to the people at local schools and see what they want to get out of it, because there's going to be a lot of overlap.
DeeDee, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, yeah, so here, I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I'm part of a Colorado Alliance for Environmental Education. And so what we do is try to bring together all the resources that are available for teachers at K-12 and undergraduate level so that they know about them. And that's definitely been a concern of many of our partners. But I think what we've kind of worked out is that places where we have environmental education centers where students used to go visit, we've said, hey, if you can go around and take pictures and put together maybe a virtual field trip or a pictorial field trip, those are things that then can be used in the classroom, and they'll last beyond COVID. So if students aren't able to actually come to your location, how can you bring your location to them? And we're like, in some cases, you may not say anything about it. So students have to do the identifying of what they see in the pictures and all of that. And in other cases, you may tell them where they're at or be able to follow a path. But we're trying to find ways for students to bring the outdoors onto their computer.
Rachel?
Yeah, I like everything that's already been said. I've partnered some with the city naturalist branch here where we are, and also a local community organization that they call themselves the Friends of the Forest, the Assiniboine Forest. So they've done a lot of public youth studies of the forest, and the naturalist branch has various roles in managing the forest, and it's been really rewarding, and some of that's happened because they've reached out to me that the kinds of things that can come out of that you can't guess beforehand. And I'll say too, a couple other things. Right now, sometimes it's difficult to collect data and to collect good data, and so I've really relied on some of these partnerships to supply real data sets for more senior students to work with. It's a lot more satisfying for them to feel like they're looking at real data that someone collected, and it means something to someone somewhere. It's not something that I just pulled out of thin air. And the other thing is that students love meeting people who work in these kinds of organizations. It gives them a sense of what else is out there that they can do as a biologist or as an ecologist, right? I don't know if your first years are all like this, but many of mine come in, they say, I'm going to be a doctor. And you say that's fine, but maybe you'll be something else and that'll be great too. And you need to kind of open those windows for them, right? And that's a really important role of other kinds of conservation organizations reaching out to students.
Actually,
they won't know if they don't meet you, they won't know the kinds of things that you do are possible.
One of the things that I was hearing out of the various panelists is that, and it's something that I think myself, is that if you look at back to Sarah Boyce's question, one of the things that I think that an ecologist in an organization like that, and actually academics who want to use the facilities of that organization for field courses, is to not think of it as one-off visits, but rather establishing a relationship. And for example, there may be data, as Rachel said, that's extant, that might actually be useful for students to analyze, that could actually provide feedback to the organization that they may not themselves have time to do with that data. Or alternatively, the data that students collect when they're there could actually be designed to be useful in some way to the organization. There are lots of ways that relationship could develop. So I think that's really good. I'm seeing another thing coming up in another chat window. Sarah says, thank you all so much. Thank you, Sarah. And there is a resource which I think I can paste it in, or maybe Katrina would do that, the BSA would do, Katrina Adams could do this for us, the virtual field, great examples and resources for basically virtual field experience. There's a web link there, it's in the chat window, which I guess people have access to. Everyone can see this, yes. So now everyone knows that, now that I know that everyone can see it. And that's been a really good round of exchanges. But while we're waiting for another question to appear, let me just make sure that I'm not missing one. Oh, I am missing one. We have Simon Bird as a question. Have any of you been utilizing citizen science tools such as iNaturalist, eBird, PlantsMap, etc., to direct undergraduate students to collect data locally on their own, and how successful has that been? Just one of the options I'm considering to replace some of the field work in my own courses. So this time I think we'll start with fear and trepidation. Rachel, want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, let me bring it up again. Using iNaturalist. I've used it as a resource for students to identify species in the field. Especially right now when they're all exploring their own field site outside their own homes. And they seem to really like it because it's app-based and it's user-friendly, but I haven't actually used it as a more formal kind of data collection tool, but I'm curious to hear if anyone else has.
I think, Rachel, I've used iNaturalist, and then they have another version called Seek in a similar way, just so that when students are outside, they know what they're looking at. The Seek app tends to work much better with plants because they're not on the move. sometimes if you can find a dead beetle or a very still beetle, you can get some insects and arthropods. But in a way, it's a nice way if you are having students look at, say, here, look at this square meter or this hula hoop of biodiversity, for them to be able to identify what is there using both common and scientific name. We've had students use eBird to help them identify which birds are in their location and at what time. And I've also told students to use eBirds, like if you see a bunch of people standing out by a pond with their binoculars and long range scopes, there's probably something unusual in that location. And if you go to eBirds, you'll probably find out what it is. So we haven't used it real formally to put together like a more formal field work, but I think it could be done because those are apps that are easily accessible.
Yeah, I'll second that plug for Seek, which is just an amazing app. It's become my new best friend in going walks. My family gets annoyed with me because I have to stop, right? I mean, it's the botanist walk, right? You stop everything, and it's helping me identify things I didn't know. So I've used it in the same way. I know for my an intro bio course, I co-teach in the spring when everyone had to go into the COVID isolation. We used iNaturalist and Seek and coupled that with Nature's Notebook, right? So a citizen science phenology. And that was a really nice way of getting students not only to learn how to identify individual organisms in their area, but then link it and get them thinking about ecology at a larger spatial scale, thinking about ecology as big data, right? We always hear of big data for molecular, but there's big data in ecology, right? All the NEON projects. So using iNaturalist really as a way of learning, and then using Nature's Notebook as a way of trying to think about hypotheses that they could then test on their own using data that they didn't collect, but that data that has been contributed by others across the country or across the world. So I think there's great potential, especially in making that explicit link between the local and regional or national data sets.
Phil, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I haven't used iNaturalist or any of those. I do have colleagues who have used those. I believe one of our summer, I think our field herpetology course was not able to be face-to-face, and they were able to come up with a remote way of doing that using iNaturalist or something along those lines. We thought about it for intro this semester, but didn't want to overload our students with too much technology and apps. But something else we have done in this class is, in Oklahoma, we have a lot of weather data here. The National Weather Service, their main facility for severe storms is just about 2 miles south of where I'm at right now. And so what we do are some data exercises where we have students access the National Weather Service data sets, download those data, analyze them. So we have some data skills and data activities we build around it. So for example, we have them download the rainfall data for about the past 30 years, and then have them do statistical tests to determine was, for example, 2015, was the rain significantly higher that year than not? But so not using citizen science the way you're thinking of, but using publicly available data sets, definitely.
Okay, good.
Can I jump in and just give one other plug for using different apps like this is that they help build scientific literacy, not only among our students, but it helps them to help others develop their scientific literacy and spread, like, here's how science is done and why it is important.
Actually, just as a very minor side note, I discovered an app this year called Picture This, which is a plant identification app, and it changed my life. I now know what all the plants in the 3-mile radius of my house are, which is wonderful. but it's when you move to another continent, you don't necessarily know the flora. We have another question. What about, actually, I think there's a follow-on question to the discussion we were just having, then we'll get to a different question from Jillian Schultz. Can you elaborate on how you tied INET to Nature's Notebook? And you could either elaborate on it or elaborate in a chat screen, depending on what seems more appropriate. Does anyone have any comment about that?
Yeah, I think I was the one that brought that up. We had students use INET to learn what species are around them, and then investigate Nature's Notebook and some of their, I off the top of my head, I'm forgetting the exact interface, but basically looking at data on the phenology of whatever species they found in their front yard, right? So if it was a lot of our students, right, it's their front yard, so there's a lot of like forsythia, a very common ornamental plant. And so the student might not know what it was, but now they could ID it with INET or Seek, and then go into Nature's Notebook and look at published data on its phenology, and then start posing hypotheses, right? Based, is the flowering going to be the same in 2019 as it was in 2018 or 2017? So they can go out and collect some of their own data and then compare that to what's in Nature's Notebook. It's not any, nothing publishable out of this, but it's getting intro bio students to learn about the world around them, to seek out additional data sources. Just the very idea that you can use data that you didn't collect, I think is novel for a lot of students. And then to get them thinking about hypothesis testing, right? And then leading into data analysis. So it was kind of an informal integration, but it worked. Especially we kind of just developed this on the fly. I mean, as we all did ad hoc stuff right then. But it worked. I was really pleased with how it went.
One of the things that's come out of this part of the discussion that I think is intriguing and in some ways kind of exciting, and we do this at St. Andrews too, is that the same data resources that one might use to design a full-blown research project in terms of online data or online analytical tools are equally as accessible for teaching. And in fact, you can have students doing stuff that is of a meaningful nature using the same resources that one might be doing to understand impacts of climate change on a local ecosystem, the same data resources. It's really quite exciting. We have one last question, and we have maybe about 1 minute. What about exploring urban ecology more? Parking lot, road median, biodiversity, for example. And we have time for a quick comment on that, if people wouldn't mind. I tend to think, oh, go ahead, DeeDee, sorry.
I was gonna say, some of these same apps are perfect for looking at that, and then asking questions of why is that plant in that location, or why is that animal here, and what allows it to be here.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's everything we've been talking about can be applied to the urban ecology. Plus, and really, if you want to integrate, there's been some really fascinating papers published recently, right? Explicitly looking at the role of socioeconomic, right? Role of racism in cities, and the structure of legal aspects rooted in racism, and how that has then impacted what plants are growing where, right? And how lawns are managed and all that. So taking urban ecology, both from a strictly ecological, but then integrating socioeconomic, right? If it's appropriate for the class, could be really powerful, especially for students who possibly don't see themselves, right, in the typical picture of who an ecologist is.
I think an important element of that is that we don't ring fence nature. Nature occurs in urban settings. It occurs everywhere. Unfortunately, I feel like we're just getting warmed up, and we're going to take that enthusiasm to the breakout groups, because if I'm not mistaken, am I correct that this is that time? Looks like it to me.
Yep,
So-
that's right.
I don't know if Katrina's going to shut us down or if we shut ourselves down.
Well, I just wanted to let you all know that the way to get to the next session would be to go back to that schedule. I had the link and now I don't anymore, but I'm going to throw it into the chat here. And you can choose which of the panelists that you'd like to attend. There's the panelists here in the breakout sessions, also the other panel that's going on. So you might have to search a little bit to choose which one you'd like to attend. But we will be starting there right now.
I'm going to use the next 10 seconds to say thank you all for a very interesting discussion. And thank you to the people who sent questions in that stimulated that discussion. This has been really good. So go to your breakout.
Right. And
All right.
thanks, Tom.
Thank
You did
you.
a fantastic job moderating. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Right.
Thanks, Katrina.
Bet.
See you soon.